So if you'll join me on chapter 12 on page 106. Here we go. When George opened his eyes again, he saw a massive pale yellow planet with a belt of rings rising in the dark sky ahead of them. They sped along on the comet, heading for a point just above the rings. From far away, the rings looked like soft ribbons. Some were pale yellow, like the planet itself. Others were darker. "This is Saturn," said Annie, "and I saw it first." "I know what it is," replied George. "And what do you mean, first?" "I'm in front of you. I saw it first." "No, you weren't looking. You were too scared. You had your eyes shut." Annie's voice rang inside his helmet. "Nee, nee, 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 nee." "No, I didn't," protested George. "Shh," Annie interrupted him. "Did you know that Saturn is the second biggest of the planets that move around the sun?" "Of course I knew," lied George. "Oh, really?" replied Annie. "Then if you knew that, you'll know which is the biggest planet of all." "Well, said George, who had no idea. "It's the Earth, isn't it?" "Wrong," trumpeted Annie. "The Earth is teeny weeny, just like your silly little brain. The Earth is only number 5. "How do you know that?" "How do I know that you've got a silly little brain?" asked Annie sarcastically. "No, stupid," said George furiously. "How do you know about the planets?" "Because I've done this trip many, many times before," said Annie, tossing her head as though throwing back her ponytail. "So let me tell you, and listen carefully," she ordered. "There are 8 planets orbiting the sun. 4 are huge and 4 are small. The huge ones are Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus. But the 2 biggest are so much bigger than the others that they're called the giants. Saturn is the second of the giant planets, and the biggest one of all is Jupiter. The 4 small planets are Mars, Earth, Venus, and Mercury," she continued, ticking them off on her fingers. "The Earth is the biggest of the small ones, but if you put these 4 together into a ball, you still see the biggest Saturn. Saturn is more than 45 times bigger than these 4 small planets added together." Annie was clearly delighted to be showing off about the planets, even though he was very annoyed by how smug she was. George was secretly impressed. All he had ever done was dig potatoes in his backyard. It wasn't much in comparison with riding around the solar system on a comet. As Annie talked, the comet flew nearer and nearer to Saturn. They got so close that George could see the rings were made up of not ribbons, but of ice, rocks, and stones. These were all different sizes, the smallest no bigger than a speck of dust, the largest about 12 feet long. Most of them were moving much too fast for George to catch one. But then he spotted a small chunk of rock calmly floating right next to him. A quick glance behind showed that Annie wasn't looking. He reached out, snatched up the rock, and held it in his space glove. A real treasure from outer space. His heart was beating fast. The sound was so loud in his ears that he thought Annie must have been able to hear it through the sound transmitter in his helmet. He suspected that taking things home from outer space was probably not allowed, so he'd hoped she hadn't noticed. "George, are you all right?" asked Annie. "Why are you wiggling around like that?" George quickly thought of something to say to divert her attention from the rock he was trying to stuff into his pocket. The next 2 pages talk about the solar system, and I'm actually going to go ahead and skip over those, and you guys can go back and reread those, and please make sure you do, and I'll be watching. But I know you've learned a lot about the solar system from Mrs. Ben, so please make sure you go back and read those. On page 112. Why did we change direction? Why did our comet move towards Saturn? Why didn't we continue in a straight line? He babbled. "Oh dear, you just don't know anything at all, do you?" sighed Annie. "It's lucky for you that I am such a fount of useful scientific knowledge," she added importantly. "We moved toward Saturn because we fell toward it, just like an apple falls on Earth, just like we fell onto the comet when we arrived, just like the particles in space clouds fall onto each other and become balls that become stars. Everything falls towards everything throughout the universe. And do you know the name of what causes it to fall? George didn't have a clue. It's called gravity. So it's because of gravity that we're going to fall onto Saturn now and crash? No, silly. We're moving way too fast to crash. We're just flying by to say hello. Annie waved at Saturn and shouted, "Hello, Saturn!" so loudly that George's hands automatically tried to cover his ears, but he couldn't because of his helmet, so instead he yelled back, "Don't shout!" "Oh, I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to." As they whizzed past Saturn, George saw that Annie was right. The comet didn't fall all the way onto the giant planet, but cruised straight past it. With some distance now, he could see that Saturn not only had rings, but had a moon, like the Earth. Looking closer, he could hardly believe his eyes. He saw another moon, and yet another, and even another. In total, he saw 5 large moons, and even more small ones, before Saturn was too far away for him to keep counting. Saturn has at least 5 moons, he thought. George hadn't known that planet other than the Earth could have even 1 moon, let alone 5. He looked at Saturn with respect as the giant planet with rings shrank into the distance behind them until it was just a bright dot in the starry background. I am going to read to you about Saturn on page 114, but please do make sure and go back and read those other 2 on your own. Saturn is the 6th closest planet to the Sun. The average distance to the Sun is 888 million miles. Diameter at the equator is 74,898 miles, corresponding to a 9.449 diameter at equator on Earth. The surface area is 83.7 times the Earth's. The volume is 763.59 times the Earth's. The mass is 95 times the Earth's. Gravity at the equator is 91.4% of the Earth's gravity at the Earth's equator. It takes Saturn 29.46 Earth years to circle the Sun. The structure is hot rocky core that is surrounded by a liquid metal layer that's itself surrounded by a liquid hydrogen and helium layer, and then is an atmosphere that surrounds it all. Winds have been recorded up to speeds of 1,116 miles per hour in Saturn's atmosphere. By comparison, the strongest wind ever recorded on Earth is 231 miles per hour at Mount Washington, New Hampshire, USA, on April 12, 1934. It is believed that wind speeds can sometimes reach over 300 miles per hour inside tornadoes. However, devastating these are, the winds are still very slow compared to Saturn's winds. So far, Saturn has 59 confirmed moons. 7 of them are round. Titan, the largest, is the only known moon within the solar system to have an atmosphere. In volume, Titan is more than 3 times bigger than our moon. All right. Don't forget to stay tuned for chapter 13 because we're doing all 3 today.